do this for the next 2 hours or so. Let me introduce my guest before we take a look at what's happening in newspapers this morning. I have with me, as always, Dismas Mokua, political risk analyst. I have with me Mark Bichache, political analyst. And I have a new entrant on the show, Eddie Gisheru Okech, a political economy analyst. And I have a governance expert, Sandra Ochola, a lawyer. A lady for the first time in a very long time here on the show. Welcome, lady and gentlemen, to the show.
Thank you.
Dismas, good morning.
Good morning.
Let's take a look at what's happening here. Let's take a look at the splash on the Sunday Nation as we begin looking at what's happening in the newspapers this morning. Intense battle for survival in Uhuru cabinet. Sunday Nation reporting on just a few of the notable CSs. Eugene Omwala, the water cabinet secretary, who is among top politicians in the cabinet, yesterday told Kiambu residents he still hoped to be retained. Mwangi Kiunjuri, remember he had to be heeded by the president to shelve his political ambitions. Amina Mohammed was seen reportedly accompanying Uhuru Kenyatta to South Africa, sparking speculation on her fate. Cleopa Mailu is seen as the consummate professional who was the president's ear but has been battling corruption allegations in the health docket. Rachel Omamo has had a quiet stint at the Ministry of Defense despite massive KDF battlefield losses in Somalia. And Cecily Kariuki, who served as a PS, Principal Secretary, before being elevated to Cabinet, serving in devolution and planning at first. What can you tell us, Dismas, what's happening in this Uhuru cabinet, which is still very much incomplete?
Well, you know, Ben, the ideal scenario would have been for all cabinet secretaries, all principal secretaries, and the top public servants to do resignation letters and hand them over to the president as soon as he was sworn into office.
Right.
So that the president would have an easy chance to pick whoever he wants to retain. But right now, the president is creating unnecessary suspense in the nation. And that's why you see all these politicians are trying to lobby for the positions. Mm-hmm. And in my view, the ones who are being retained is not necessarily because of their performance. Because a number of them who've been retained are people who are actually working against the president's policy. Like, for instance, President Kenyatta had indicated that he wanted Kenya to be a 24-hour economy. Yet one of his ministers imposed a ban saying that you can't travel in the night. So if you come from Kisii like I do and you're traveling to Kisii in the middle of the night, you see a lot of people engaging in trade and commerce. So those people have had to close shop because now you can only operate during the day. So it seems to me that the president has got a secret scorecard that he's using. I mean, if you look at those ministers, you look at Eugene Wamalwa. At some stage, you are told that the president wanted politicians in his cabinet, and Wamalwa has been all over town, opening water taps, launching projects, giving the president visibility. The same is the case for Kiunjuri. One would easily say the same for Amina Mohammed. Amina Mohammed is credited for diplomacy around ICC. So it seems to me that there is something the president is looking at, and that may boil down to two things. The president is concerned over his legacy, while the deputy president is concerned over succession. And of course, there are other stakeholders interested in that. Yeah. So now, in my view, there's no way you can have that combination in one cabinet. You can't have a legacy cabinet and a succession cabinet working at the same time. And I think those are the issues the president is facing. There's a very high probability that if he doesn't take into active consideration the wishes of the deputy president, then the names he will propose to the National Assembly may not go through the vetting process. You saw a few weeks ago a number of MPs who are said to be associated with the deputy president defying the Jubilee parliamentary group orders because they were told when you go to the National Assembly, you've got the tyranny of numbers, do not run for these committee seats because we may end up having MPs from, or rather, the leadership of the National Assembly from two communities, and they decided to go against the grain. So it seems all is not rosy. But the president must come up because he's the head of state. And, you know, be very firm and tell people that I'm going to give you a solid cabinet for the future.
Does the president have a secret scorecard? And what is it?
Let me just say this. One of the things, and I'll speak now as a communication strategist, that Kenyans must realize is that for 2 weeks now, all we've discussed is whether the president has fired these guys or not, what his criteria is using for appointing them, and who will he appoint and who will he retain if these guys have been fired or not. And the media has swung in between opinions for a very long time. Now, in politics, this is the best thing the president can do. Because number one, what he wanted to do, number one, is to drown out the noise of January 30th. And it's not even in the news anymore. Number two is to drown out any bad news that can come out in January. Part of the bad news, of course, could be things like parents who fainted when they discovered they needed to pay some fees somewhere. So this is political genius on the part of the president, to create a situation where we're debating endlessly about things that are rather obvious. And I'll tell you why they're rather obvious. Number one, the debate that is this an Uhuru-led cabinet or a Ruto-led cabinet is a bit skewed, and I'll tell you why. For Deputy President William Ruto, it really doesn't matter for him who is in cabinet. It matters that Uhuru delivers on his promises. Because if Uhuru delivers, then he can ride on those coattails and say, look, this is what I helped Uhuru deliver. So for William Ruto, even if he was to be as selfish as he wanted, he has hedged all his bets on the success of Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta. That means that legacy cabinet and the cabinet to follow is simply based on the fact that William Ruto has decided that the success of Uhuru Kenyatta is his own success. And with that light, you have to understand that the measure that the president will use is two things. Number one, who will be able to deliver for him, and number two, who will be seen to deliver. And seen to deliver is very important. People who can engage the public and capture the public imagination into the big for which the president is pushing. But as a communication strategy, breaking it up like it has now, for the first time, Jubilee is leading the conversation.
All right, we'll wait to see. Eddie, on page 2 of the Sunday Nation, Deputy President William Ruto yesterday denied claims that there is a rift between him and President Uhuru Kenyatta over the formation of the cabinet. In your view, what do you think is happening?
I think, as you just mentioned, it is a denial. Because Ruto is not, the relation between Ruto and Uhuru is not something that we are doing to us today. We've seen 5 years governance of William Ruto and President Kenyatta, where they have actually worked as a co-presidents. We've seen Ruto and Uhuru who come in public many times and do things jointly. We've seen, even right now, the naming of the cabinet, the so far naming of the cabinet by the president was about President Muigai Kenyatta.
Rather than we.
But not, it was not we. So that alone gives you a lot of indication of what is going on. And I wanted to dive a little bit about this idea that the communication around cabinet is only political strategy to communicate something different. It's actually indicative that there is a lot of struggle between President Uhuru Kenyatta and the deputy.
Do you believe, like Mark says, that it has poured cold water on NASA's swearing in?
Not actually. I actually think that it is really mutually exclusive. It is the trouble in Jubilee that actually just strengthens NASA. Because if you look at it critically, when you're running for office, you're running for office knowing that you're going to offer services to Kenyans. So you should have in mind people who you're going to appoint as your cabinet. You should have in mind what government you're going to form. You cannot have a struggle for a fortnight thinking around who is going to be where, because that alone is bringing a lot of trouble in terms of what can be delivered to Kenyans. So this can only be political, and it's a political struggle, as Disney said, between Ruto and Uhuru, in forming a succession cabinet vis-a-vis a performance and legacy cabinet.
Fair enough. Sandra, what do you think?
Politics will be the bane of us as Kenyans. We read politics in everything that we do. And from the conversations you've had right now, we also love to speculate a lot on matters politics. And the speculation right now is the quality of the cabinet, and of course now, as my colleagues have said, whether there's a tug of war between the deputy president and the president. And my thinking is that From my perspective, it is a government that has been able to deliver. It might not have done 100% of what Kenyans expected, but it has been able to deliver between 2013 and now. And I think we have to look back at the history of how these two individuals came together. Their successes over the time between 2013 and 2017 as we speak.
Right.
And so from where I sit, I wouldn't want to speculate too much as to whether there's a rift between the deputy president and the president, because we are seeing things moving. Despite all the speculation, things are moving. And of course, another thing that we need to keep in mind is that most times it shouldn't be so much about the personalities. As Kenyans, we must take a step back and look at what the government is doing, what it has achieved, what it is able to achieve, and what it intends to do moving forward. So that regardless of who gets to that position, whether it's from a Ruto side or Uhuru side, this is an individual who's able to deliver. And I think that is some of the things that perhaps the government is looking into as it appoints. Competence.
All right.
Competence.
All right. It's a story we will continue to keep an eye on. Uhuru's incomplete cabinet, whether that is a stroke of genius from the president's side, as Mark says, we'll see, time will tell. Another story that has been in the news, of course, the last 2 days, is the story of the Wajir governor, Ambassador Mohamed Mohamud, who the High Court did deals a blow, taking people of Wajir back to the ballot. They will be going for a by-election. There are a number of dismissals, there are a number of petitions concerning governors. That is what I'm focusing on in court. There is Alfred Mutua, who is facing a court battle with Wavinya Ndetsi. There is in Kitui, Charity Ngilu facing a petition from Dr. Julius Malombe. Do you see any pattern forming, or do you expect any more heads to roll following what happened in Wajir? And what do you think about the Wajir case?
Well, you know, it's your question is very complicated, and one would imagine that somebody has got access to the court documents to predict what the likely ruling is. But again, the ruling on the Wajir matter is nothing strange in Kenya, because we were told that the last election were marred by illegalities and irregularities. That was the basis as to why the presidential election was nullified. So that we're having other elections being nullified is nothing shocking. It's probably consistent with what IBC did, the errors they committed either of omission or commission. So there's really nothing surprising that we are going to have a by-election. When you follow the case for Dr. Mutua, for instance, he made an attempt to go to the Court of Appeal so that he would stop the proceedings at the High Court because of what lawyers described as frivolous. So really there is, in my mind, from where I'm seated, I think we are going to have many more petitions, and the probability of them succeeding is very high. And maybe the question we need to be asking ourselves, when you have an election like Wajir being nullified, is there somebody who is going to pay for that? I mean, is there somebody from IBC who is going to be found guilty for some offenses? Because now the people for Wajir, in their view, that elected a governor, and they were hoping they would be able to hit the ground running.
Right.
Now they'll go back to another by-election. I suspect a number of cabinet ministers, or rather county ministers, have already been confirmed. They're in office. Maybe the ex-governors come up with his development agenda. They're going to be disrupted. So they may end up losing up to 1 year.
All right. If I can just clarify, of course, Ambassador Mohammed his election was nullified as his academic papers were found not to have been in order. Mark, Jubilee has lost a governor. What do you see happening there?
Well, it's for me, let me start here. I've always thought that the qualification and requirement for a leader in this country to have an academic degree, I've always thought it is unfair. And there's only one reason why I think it is unfair. We do not have universal education up to the university level. And there are factors, including poverty, that keep people from getting access to that thing. And that makes it by itself a discriminatory law, in the sense that unless you've given everyone an equal opportunity, you cannot segregate them then based on something that could have been out of their own control. That being said, number one is Jubilee as a party is a unique party in this country. If you defragment NASA into its constituent parties, then you will find that we have very tribal-based parties in this country, by and large. But Jubilee is the only party that enjoys support pretty much across the country. You can find places where they have less support, but pretty much they have support across the country. And that means, and this will be a critical test for Jubilee, that did people vote for the individual or did they vote for the party? If they voted for the party, then they're likely to go that way again. If they voted for the individual, then there's going to be a bruising battle based on the fact that this individual has been barred effectively from running again. He's been disqualified.
So Jubilee has to find another candidate.
Exactly. So the question is, did the people in Wajir vote for a political party called Jubilee, or did they vote for a person in the person of their former governor? That's the quick question. If Jubilee can come up on top and say, you know what, these guys voted for us as a party, it will be a good sign for Jubilee moving forward.
All right.
But if they voted for an individual,
yes,
then Jubilee will have to consolidate its base even further.
Eddie, many see the former governor, Ahmed Abdullahi, as a front runner now. What is your take on the disqualification, nullification of the governor's election?
First of all, Ben, we cannot underestimate the idea of merit and competency in leadership and governance, because delivery of services and any kind of visionary leadership in any community is predicated on competency and qualifications. Right. And the idea of having education, certain education levels as the basis for having a leader is an attempt towards building a society that you can start looking at leadership for merit. So I just wanted to put that by the side. But I think that what I'm reading here mostly is institutional failure. Because sometimes we tend to focus on what has happened now, but not what happened in the past. Before somebody vies for a position such as governor, there are institutions that are mandated to actually do a screening of these individuals. One of them is Jubilee as a party. What does this tell you as on Jubilee as a party? If a serious candidate such as a governor can actually go to the ballot without the right papers. We also have the IBC that is supposed to actually pre-check and actually look at the qualification of these individuals and some established constitutional framework for which somebody can be voted in. We have the anti-corruption agencies in this country. So this is indicative of a serious, massive failure of institutions in this country that then put us into a lot of struggles in courts after an election has been conducted, and then it actually deprives the taxpayer a lot of money to repeating exercises. So this is an indication that we should go back to our institutions and be able to interrogate whether we are actually conducting our institutions in the right way.
Sandra, do you agree, and do you think this is done for Jubilee, as Jubilee lost one member at the Council of Governors?
Let me look at, okay, we are talking institutions and we are talking people checking, but for me it boils down to you as an individual. And I think as a community we are moving to a place where there are certain vices that we are embracing. And part of it is our little understanding of the Constitution. And even if you've read the Constitution, we are failing to live what the Constitution provides. You find there's a chapter in the Constitution, chapter 6, on leadership and integrity, detailing some of the things that you as a leader are supposed to do, what is expected of you, what you're not supposed to be doing as a leader. And yet you still find a good number of our leaders going ahead, breaking these rules and taking Kenyans for granted. And even before we get to the discussions about the institutions, the question should be, why would someone who wants to take up a leadership position, who wants to mentor, so to speak, perform or conduct a fraudulent activity for him to meet a particular goal? So even before we begin to castigate our institutions, let us go back and look at our value system as Kenyans.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you. That's where we leave it in terms of taking a look at what's happening in the newspapers. A lot is happening in terms of politics and governance. You can check out in more details in the papers, especially the Sunday Standard. You're watching a Sunday edition. Many thanks for staying with us. When we return, we talk about the latest war in town, or is it in the country? That is Sonko versus Igathe, following Igathe's resignation as Nairobi City County Deputy Governor. We'll talk about what Sunday Nation is calling city's dirty war, and what the Standard is calling, or is asking, is Sonko taking the war right to the doorstep of State House. Don't go too far.